Everybody, welcome. It is the 18th of January, 2022, and we want to welcome you to the SABR Rocky Mountain virtual for today, our first meeting of 2022. I'm Dan Evans. I'm on the SABR National Board, and I'm the president of the SABR chapter here in the Rocky Mountain region. We welcome all of you. We welcome all of our Rocky Mountain members. We welcome other SABR members, visiting dignitaries, and all of you from the OLLI program, which is hosted by a couple of our chapter members, most notably board member Greg Petty. A couple things before we get started. We will not have a regular meeting tomorrow at Blake Street Tavern due to COVID concerns. The board got together and we decided it's in the best interest of the chapter to refrain from any in-person meetings right now. We'll alert you as we move forward, but our feeling is all of us are looking out for the best interests of everyone. We thought this was the right thing to do. We've had a lot of conversations, a lot of email chats, a 3-hour virtual meeting as a board, and we have some really fun things coming your way in 22 and beyond. One thing we will do is we'll have more virtuals in 2022, not just because of COVID, but because we're able to get guests like we have tonight. I want to introduce the 22 board real quick, starting with Greg Petty, Patrick Lyons, Manny Randawa. We have 2 newcomers to the board, Ken Reed in an at-large position, and Carm Reel, who's our treasurer, Alex Marks, our secretary and master of ceremonies. As you can tell, he is the gatekeeper, and Kurt Wells, our vice president. I also want to say hello to Paul Parker, who we honored with the President Emeritus title at the conclusion of his most recent, and I say most recent, there it is, there's the award. And we thought you might sell it. And Paul, we're thrilled to have you here. Paul is the foundation and the rock of our chapter. And we just hope to carry it forward as Paul has done such a great job. A few announcements, admin stuff, and then we're going to go to our special guest. You should be getting a publication in the mail this week, or if you decide to pick it up online, it's called The Negro Leagues Are the Major Leagues. It's fantastic. I fully digested it about a week ago. It's really, really good. You should get that this week. In addition, the baseball analytics course is being started by SABR. It's a course which will give you an early information about analytics in general. It's going to be one heck of a great offering. I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. It's going to be I have the information here somewhere, but it's going to be $185 for non-members and $120 for members. It's going to be an online virtual course, which will give you a history of analytics, a basic understanding of analytics, and when you're done, you get something that you can embed on a resume, on a LinkedIn profile, which will indicate that you have completed the first of 3 SABR courses regarding analytics. That will debut on Monday. Look for it on the SABR website, and it'll also be a link in this week in SABR. The virtual SABR Analytics Conference is not very far away, March 17th to the 20th. Early bird pricing ends January 31st. It bumps up another $25 on the 1st of February. So if $25 matters to you, get yourself in there now. It's $75 for members, $100 for non-members. For college and high school students, it's $50. And for $50, you also get a 1-year membership. So it's a heck of a deal. Also, for any of you who are interested in a SABR internship, like one of our people on this call, Christopher Cohn, once was, the conclusion of the filing to apply for the internship is also January 31st. In addition, on February 3rd, the debut of Ballpark Figures, which is going to be hosted by Shakia Taylor, debuts on February 3rd, 6 o'clock our time. It's a virtual, and it'll be held the first Thursday of every month. And Shakia is going to explore people within the game. She has a really great interviewing style. I think it'll be very interesting. SABR Day is February 5th. Make plans on your calendar between 9 and 11 our time. We will host either a virtual or an in-person. We will decide that in the next week, given the COVID situation right now, but we will be prepared, and we will have 2 hours of SABR Day between 9 and 11 if virtual on February 5. Lastly, the submission deadline for SABR 50 abstracts is Friday, March 4th. As of right now, the Baltimore convention is a go. That's August 17th to the 21st. Phil Ross, one of our members, contacted me today. He's got COVID. He's at Heritage Left in Aurora. He's in quarantine for 14 days. If you have his contact information, reach out to Phil. Seems to be doing pretty well. He was asking for salty snacks, which is so Phil. I want to welcome 3 new members. I don't know if they're with us tonight. Peter Reel from Colorado Springs, who's going to celebrate a birthday this month. He's a Twins fan. He loves the history of the game. Pete Van Bethenhuizen, a Denver resident, a UDen stat major, and Mike Ryan of Lakewood. Welcome to our chapter. We're really grateful to have you. So let's get started. Tonight, we are so lucky. We have a guest who's one of the preeminent people about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Jay Jaffe is a senior writer for FanGraphs, my absolute favorite baseball portal. I love it. I'm on it multiple times a day. Jay writes daily. He's been a SABR member for 20 years, so he's one of us. I think Jay, without question, is the guy that people look to for the Hall of Fame. 2 years ago, when we did the major move trying to get Larry Walker into Cooperstown, a successful effort, remember how much we pointed to Jaws at that moment? Well, the author and I would say the developer of the Jaws system on Baseball Reference is our guest tonight, Jay Jaffe. Jay, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Good to be here. And thank you for that nice introduction.
Well, Jay, you're a rock star when it comes to the Hall of Fame. You know, for all of you on FanGraphs, he's writing about all the candidates, and it's fascinating. And it's changed my opinion about a couple of people. So I'd love to start it out, and thank you for joining us from Brooklyn tonight. So Donna, you've got somebody nearby you. How did this start? How did you get this this love affair that became an incredibly expert position regarding the Hall of Fame, Jay?
Well, it's a good question. It's a bit of a story. I grew up in Salt Lake City, so go Rocky Mountains, which had AAA baseball, but no major league team. I was an avid Dodger fan growing up. Also watched the local affiliate of the Angels, and then they became the affiliate of the Mariners. When I discovered Bill James in the Dan Okrent profile on him in Sports Illustrated, and I think it was 1981, I was so struck by his way of looking at baseball. I mean, I was already borrowing my mother's pocket calculator to compute batting averages and ERAs at like age 10 or whatever. And I started reading Bill James, and within his annual baseball abstracts, he wrote, I think the first thing he introduced within that had relevance to the Hall of Fame was similarity scores and the Hall of Fame monitor. And then he brought out his historical abstract in about, I think, 1985, the first one. And he talked about ranking the player, or he ranked the players at each position on the basis of career value and peak value. There was some subjectivity to it, but it was two ways of looking at the same question. And all this stuff kind of stuck with me. And then, as I went off to college, baseball kind of, fell on the back burner for me. But when I stumbled across his book, The Politics of Glory, in the mid 90s, after moving to New York, it kind of rekindled an interest for me. And then when the second edition of the historical abstract came out and he had introduced win shares, I was really, my wheels were spinning in my mind, because that was around the time I discovered Baseball Think Factory and Baseball Reference, and just had a lot of thoughts. And I started blogging myself at Futility Infielder. And one of the big things that I wrote was a breakdown of the 2002 Hall of Fame ballot. And I was using, looking at win shares and making tables and trying to see, what advanced stats had to say about the Hall of Fame. And it interested me because, baseball history is a story of wide variations in scoring from, era to era. And wide variations from park to park. And you guys are perfectly situated to understand that, because Coors Field is such a hitter's haven. Salt Lake City, where I grew up, is a hitter's haven as well, 4,000 feet above sea level. So I always had a rude awakening when it came to those minor leaguers getting to Anaheim or Seattle, where it was a lot tougher to hit. But after doing this a couple of years, Baseball Prospectus invited me to do something for their site on the Hall of Fame, and I decided I was going to use their version of wins above replacement player, which was the next step beyond win shares, and had estimates of a player's defensive value as well as offense. And I wanted to see, rather than look at the traditional milestones and 3,000 hits, 500 home runs, and kind of try to square that with positional variations, because obviously you don't have a lot of catchers getting to 3,000 hits or whatever. I decided to look at total value and using WARP, and to compare each player on the basis of his career value and his peak value. And that I averaged the two figures, because why not? It seemed like the right thing to do. And that was the system that became JAWS. And it caught on. Baseball Prospectus was behind a paywall, so it had, I think, limited reach, but it did click for some people, and it became more popular, and it became, something that I got known for, along with my other writing. And after doing that at BP up through about 2011, I moved over to Sports Illustrated, and at that point I moved from BP's WARP to Baseball Reference's version of WAR, and Sean Foreman put it all over the site on all the player cards and special position tables, and suddenly it got a lot more accessible. My stuff was at Sports Illustrated's website, and actual voters were using it and citing it in their ballot breakdowns, and it was really a flattering thing. Just before moving to SI, I got admitted to the BBWAA. I guess it was about a year before, and started my service clock, so to speak. I moved to FanGraphs in 2018, and got the vote in. I guess last year was my first ballot. Got my 10 years. I've kept with the Baseball Reference version of WAR, despite the fact that FanGraphs has a competing version of WAR. That was just part of the deal when they brought me on, and I think that Baseball Reference's version of WAR is better for historical purposes, especially when it comes to pitching. But it's certainly not outside the boundaries to look at what FanGraphs WAR says. I'll probably do something on that here sometime in the near future, although I think the pitching values are very different. And so I get a little nervous when people start over relying on those and telling me I'm wrong or whatever. It's been interesting to observe how the electorate and the whole process has changed, and we can get into that more here as the discussion continues. But it just started with a question of like, what do advanced stats tell us about the value of players in the Hall of Fame? We've got these new tools. What can we do with them? And everything I've done has gone from there.
Yeah, and you're comparing players, eligible players, effectively, to players at their position who are already in the Hall, right?
Right. Yeah, I want to compare. You want to compare the catchers to catchers. You don't want to be measuring them against, the power hitting first baseman. Likewise for shortstops, starting pitchers, obviously relievers. Yeah, you want to, you want to be comparing like to like, and I think, you want to have an appreciation for the variations in baseball history that we've seen, but you want to see if there's any kind of constants there. And through this process, I discovered some real blind spots that voters had. Some that not all choices were created equal, and this kind of fueled some obsessions of mine that led to series and eventually to my book, the Cooperstown Casebook. I think there's three. Which came out in 2017. There's three central pieces in there that I think kind of define my research on that. One on the why are there so few third basemen in the Hall of Fame, which is centered around Ron Santo. One about the Veterans Committee and the damage that it's done, admitting a lot of people from the 20s and 30s with high offense stats and not a whole lot of value. And then one called Blylevin, Morris, and the War on War. And it was about the encroachment of advanced stats, in the Hall of Fame arguments and kind of the old school, new school ways of looking at it and how it played out with the eventual election of those two guys. Although I guess at the time the book was published, Jack Morris wasn't in yet, although it seemed like it was a matter of time. But yeah, you want to compare, you want to find a good basis of comparison. You start with the players at those positions. And you want to remember that there's the number's the number. It's not a yes or no question. It's a tool to use as a starting point, and you want to bring other context to it. I mean, Jaws can tell you that Jackie Robinson is ranked, 8th among second basemen. It won't tell you that, he didn't get to start his major league career until age 28, or that the color line was in place, or all of that thing. That's all context that we want to bring to this. Likewise, what he did in the World Series, or any player, for that matter, not just Jackie Robinson. So you want to bring all of that in there, but it starts with a comparison of value to the other guys at the position who are already in.
Great stuff. Now, so all of you know, Jay is also a pioneer. He's too humble to tell you, so I'm going to tell you. He's the first independent blogger to get a Hall of Fame vote. And that's pretty darn cool. All of us would love a Hall of Fame vote. Jay, you've got one. That's a heck of a thing to look at, looking back, 15 years ago when you started, 12 years ago when you started to grab that Hall of Fame vote. I know how much it means to you. Can you talk a little bit about, because we're going to talk about your vote in a moment, and we're going to talk about the 22 class, but I'd love you to tell us the emotions that were going through you last year when you finally got that opportunity, and how you felt in general.
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, it's the realization that you're one of 400 people voting. Your vote itself is kind of small. I felt, first of all, looking at, there had been a wave of 22 players elected over the previous 7 years. There were no good first-year candidates on our ballot last year, and I was like, man, this is the ultimate irony. I've spent years advocating for players to get in, and right now the cupboard's kind of bare because nobody was close to taking that last step, with the exception of Curt Schilling, and he had his own self-sabotage, ongoing self-sabotage in effect. It was really humbling, and I think, the vote itself is kind of symbolic. I think I've done more to have an impact on the process as an outsider before getting the ballot than I could have as just one voter. I think I could look at the work that I've done. I mean, 8 of the players that I profiled in the casebook are in now 5 years later. I know that that era committee voters have seen it. Ted Simmons and Alan Trammell got in the Hall of Fame that way. Vinny Minoso as well. I don't know if my work directly influenced them, but I was certainly putting in the work. Likewise for Tim Raines, Larry Walker, Edgar Martinez, Mike Messina. I think Mariano Rivera would have gotten in without my help. It was a bigger deal when I started writing it than by the time he got on the ballot. It was the first darn unanimous selection ever. I didn't see that one coming. I thought I was going to have to try to convince people, but no. They got it. They got it without me. It was a lot of emotion. I sat down to do it and fill out the ballot, and had my wife snap a photo of me as I was doing it for for a little historic moment. And then you put that thing out in the world, and I put it out with probably the longest ballot explainer in the history of mankind, 4,000 words or whatever. And people, I had been doing this virtual exercise before, my virtual ballot, and it always generated a significant response because of the guys we'll talk about here soon, the very polarizing ones like the PED guys and Schilling. But man, it's nothing until you've put it out there as an actual ballot, and it's been tweeted out in the ballot tracker, and all of a sudden, incoming, you'll spend the whole day hearing about it on social media. Like, you're an idiot for including this guy. You're an idiot for excluding that guy. You should have your ballot revoked. You haven't followed the rules. Everybody's got an opinion about this stuff, and they bring a lot of passion to it. And that's been my luck to fall into this niche, and to be able to, bolster my career with it, to actually make a career with this as a foundational piece. But boy, in the heat of it, when people are throwing insults at you and telling you don't know shit about baseball, it'll test the thickness of your skin. But I think I've writing about baseball every day for a decade, or better or worse, you kind of develop that thick skin anyway. So somewhat inured to it.
I love it. Well, let's talk about what we all argue about, which is one of the fun things about our game. Let's talk about your ballot this year. You are allowed 10 votes. Just so you know, Jay, as a chapter, we did our own voting, and we'll have our Secretary of State, Alex Marks, announce that later on tonight. But you had your own ballot again this year. You filled it, and there's a great piece that you wrote in FanGraphs about why. But you filled it up. You used all 10 of your votes. I'd love you to chat about your 10 selections. And, obviously a few of them are polarizing.
Right.
So, if anything you want to say about each of them, go ahead.
Okay. So before going through this, so what I think every voter has to answer the question for themselves, how they're going to tackle the PED issue. That has been the dominant issue on the ballot since Mark McGuire landed on it in 2007. It's going to be there probably for as long as Alex Rodriguez is on it, which right now could be another decade. There's no way around but through, as my wife likes to say. So the position that I take is that I see it as two things. Anything that happened before testing and penalties were in place in 2004 belongs to one situation, which I believe really owes to a complete institutional failure that implicated the owners, the commissioner, the players union, the individual players, to some extent the media, to some extent the fans. Everybody had a piece of allowing all this to happen. The players were using, probably, they're using because the stuff, they thought it worked. And but at the same time, they were doing it without any, while knowing that there weren't really any consequences for it. It was an unpoliced stretch of highway strip. They could speed. Whereas, everything that happened afterwards, when there's testing in place, that belongs to a different era. I keep the Wild West stuff on one side. It doesn't affect my vote. That includes the survey test. I'll judge those guys on their merits as candidates. To me, so I vote, I've had Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds on my ballot every year, virtual ballots and actual ballots. I had Sammy Sosa on last year. I ended up bumping him off this year. I'm less convinced about Sammy Sosa's case. He's a little bit low in jaws. He's probably, more of a creation, of the PED situation than Bonds or Clemens, who were better all-around players. Although Sammy Sosa's defense is surprisingly strong by the metrics. But so yes, I include those two. I left off Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez because they both were suspended for PEDs. I did not ultimately. Well, long story short, I did include David Ortiz on my ballot, but I did not set out that that I was going to be set on including him. He was the only player in the book, the case book, of the 14 that I profiled at length, that I was not convinced I was going to vote for. He's short in jaws because I'm measuring, even DH guys get measured relative to a position. And, when you don't have the same value as a position player, you wind up a bit short. Now, Edgar Martinez was above the value of the average third baseman in the Hall of Fame. David Ortiz is about 10 WAR short of the average first baseman in the Hall of Fame, and about 13 more short of where Edgar was. So I wasn't really convinced that I had to find a spot for him, but ultimately I did. The guys that I am convinced on the basis of jaws and the surrounding evidence: Scott Roland, Todd Helton, Andrew Jones, and Billy Wagner. Roland is one of the top 10 third basemen of all time. A top 3 fielder, about a top 15, 10 or 15 hitter, 15 or 20 hitter, depending on how you're measuring. Great two-way combination. Helton, once you adjust for Coors Field and all that, he comes out with a peak that's better than the average Hall first baseman. And a jaws that now, with the election of Gil Hodges, has fallen just enough so that he's right there at the line. Funny how that worked out. Andrew Jones is, I think, a top 10 or maybe 11 fielder with a very high peak. There's the petering out of his career, but I think the defensive excellence he had, you combine that with the impact he had on those Braves teams, it's an impressive combination. He's number 1 in fielding runs, by the way the Baseball Reference measures it. And there's maybe a little bit of gray area in there, as I think Chris Dial has explained on Twitter, and I cite that in my article. But I think the numbers are still strong enough for me. Billy Wagner. Now I've deviated from my WAR-based jaws system on relievers a few different times, and now I'm bringing in win probability added and context neutral wins. which factors in leverage as well. And when I do that, Billy Wagner stands as the best reliever outside the Hall of Fame, with the election of Hoffman and Rivera. So he's next on the list, and I can't think of a good reason other than, he's short. He's got a fewer innings than any other reliever in the Hall, but the pure dominance is so impressive. Lowest batting average against, highest strikeout rate. Two things about him, and then there's this, just the fact that he did this. He did all this by, after learning to throw left-handed because he broke his right arm twice in a row as a kid. It's a very impressive, narrative and combination. And I was really, researching it, and I was like, okay, this guy's a guy I want to vote for. So that's 6 guys, 6 slots there. Gary Sheffield and Bobby Abreu, I both have. They're both a little low among the right fielders in JAWS, but they're ahead of Vladimir Guerrero, who was elected with 90% of the vote a few years ago. Sheffield's defensive numbers are like historically awful, but I wonder the extent to which they're a bit hyperbolic. Other systems that use more regression shave a lot of that defensive negative defensive value down. He was also a personal favorite of mine. Loved to watch him hit, especially when he was here in New York. He frustrated the hell out of me at times when he was with the Dodgers. And I'm sure Dan can relate to that. But boy, there have not been 5 guys in the last 25 years I'd rather see hit than Gary Sheffield. Just a remarkable hitter. Abreu, highly underrated combination of skills. I think if he'd been better at defense, he'd have been an easier sell. By the time he got to New York and I saw him on a regular basis, he was very wall shy. But that speed and on base percentage and power combination, really exceptional. And I was glad to find room for him on my ballot last year. So let's see, that's 8. Okay, so who am I missing here? Joe Nathan.
Nathan. Yep.
Joe Nathan is next on the list below Wagner in career in my what I'm now calling our JAWS. He's a little bit below, but not by much. The electorate does not seem to be very convinced. I think I'm one of 4 voters in the ballot tracker who included him. I don't know that we'll get to consider him again. That's part of the reason I included him instead of Sosa. Sosa's a 10th year candidate. He's also above the Vlad line among right fielders. But I could see that Sosa was not going to really make an impact in this election and he's falling off. And so I figured, if I don't vote for Joe Nathan and try to win people's attention for his cause, we're not going to get to consider him again. So I figured that was worth a shot. And I wonder if I should have done the same for Jonathan Papelbon, who's the next one down the line, at least in terms of those among the writers. But he is, I think, a full step below those guys in value by both measures. And I think there's enough separation there because of, he's 150 or 200 innings short of the other guys that, if I can't sell you a 900 inning reliever, I'm not going to sell you a 740 inning reliever, 20% fewer innings. So let's see, who am I missing here?
Poppy.
Oh yeah. And then, when I did all that, I had room for David Ortiz. And to me, the postseason stuff, I think has enough value. I think other people probably have beaten me to that. And you want to leave room for the subjective weighting of that. But obviously, a guy who's the central figure of 3 championships for the Red Sox, an icon in the city of Boston. I think what tilted the balance for me was the fact that, there was a BBWA shutout last year, and a very muted celebration for the midweek induction this year. I'm happy that we got 4 honorees out of the ERA committee, including 2 living ones. This is my way of trying to send Cooperstown a Valentine with a younger generation candidate that I hope will draw tens of thousands of people if he's elected this year. So I think that it's apparent by the percentage that he was already drawing that excuse me, that he's going to get in one way or another. It may not be this year, but he's going in. I don't want to fight it. I just as soon see him get in, especially under the circumstances.
Well, and Jay, his triple slash in the series is what, 455,
Yeah,
576, 795. That's not bad.
Yeah, monster numbers. And then of course, then the notable omission is Curt Schilling, and Jaws shows Schilling as a top 30 pitcher of all time. For years, he was on all of my virtual ballots. I think I bumped him off 1 year to make a point of the need for some kind of ballot strategizing to I think it might have been when Billy Wagner was in danger of himself not making it to a second cycle. And I didn't have a vote then, but I wanted to, show my work and show that Billy Wagner was a guy that I would vote for. I'm increasingly uncomfortable with the things that Schilling has said that are, totally extraneous to baseball. But, I think they took a real turn in the last year with the election stuff and the COVID stuff. And I've kept all the receipts. I have links to every single allegation, every quotation that I've kept track of, every controversy that I've kept track of. And ultimately, my conclusion is that I don't want to give him the increased platform that Hall of Fame election would. I don't really couch it in the character clause. To me, the character clause is something that I don't put a lot of stock in, because it was the brainchild of Judge Landis, who spent his entire 24-year term upholding the color line. To me, he's no moral authority. I don't want to hear. I don't want to make moral judgments in his name. But Schilling, I think, represents a unique case where there's the blind spots of the traditional system. There's value in being a Hall of Famer. You get a bigger megaphone. I don't think he's a guy I want with a bigger megaphone. It's that pure and simple. I would not want to attend an induction ceremony when he's there. I think he's got some real issues, and it saddens me because I liked watching him play. I was rooting against him a lot of those occasions, but before that, I was rooting for him. I mean, I remember watching him in the 1993 World Series, and I was like, I'd never seen Curt Schilling before that. And I was like, wow, this guy. I mean, I guess I'd seen him in the playoffs, but I was like, this guy's really good. So it saddens me that it got to this point. But I left him off this year. I left him off last year while leaving an empty space on my ballot to make a statement. That did not go over well, but it was a statement that I was comfortable with. But let's see, that was my 10, and I don't think anybody has matched that ballot this year because of the oddity of Joe Nathan. There's only 3 other people that we know of who voted for Nathan, so it might be that I don't get anybody matching. It was funny, a couple of years ago. I think this would have been the 2019 ballot. Maybe it's the 2020 ballot, but my one ballot match was somebody from your neck of the woods, Tracy Ringlesby, whom I have, sometimes been at diametrically opposite viewpoints on in terms of player evaluation, but he was on board with the Larry Walker stuff, and I saw him citing War and Jaws and whatever. And so I found it very funny that we'd come full circle and actually had the same ballot for 1 year. And I got a giggle out of it. I hope Tracy got a giggle out of it too, because made for strange bedfellows.
Who do you think gets in next Tuesday? It's next Tuesday at 4:00 our time. MLB Network, the announcement will come out. Who do you think gets a plaque in Cooperstown next Tuesday?
Yeah, I think it's Ortiz or bust. You look at the tracker, and Ortiz is here. I'm pulling it up here on the screen.
Tell everybody what you're using. The tracker.
Yeah, so I'm using the not Mr. Tibbs ballot tracker. This is Ryan Thibodeau's effort He's got, I think, 3 or 4 assistants that help him. And, so far over 171 voters have sent their ballots to him or his underlings, 10 of them anonymously. And those guys, they break down the ballots. You get a bit of demographic information out of it. How many votes per ballot we're seeing, what percentage are 10-man ballots, what percentage are 1-man ballots or whatever, who would have been included if the ballot was larger than 10 slots. And we have a lot of data to tell us what the fall offs are and what the likelihoods of election are. So right now, David Ortiz is polling at 83.6% with about 43% of the electorate reporting. Traditionally, most guys see some kind of dip in their percentage from the pre-announcement publication to the final. Barry Bonds, 77%, Roger Clemens, 76%. Historically, we've seen those guys drop by about 12 points to their final. So they're not going to get in this year. They're going to be the problem with the ERA committee starting next year. Ortiz, because he's a PED guy, might have that big a fall off too. But one comparison is that he's tracking slightly ahead of where Pudge Rodriguez was, and Pudge got in with 76%, just squeaked in by a handful of votes a few years ago. So voters may not be viewing what he's the stuff about him, which pertains to the survey test and to some extent was exonerated by Rob Manfred a few years ago during his retirement tour. There's still, I think, a chance he will get in. I think the probabilistic model has him. One of the I guess he's not actually on the tracker team, but he's sort of in their orbit. A guy named Jason Sardell has estimated that he's got about a 70% chance of election. So it's a little bit more advanced his way of projecting things. But I think it's either him or bust. Scott Rowland's polling at 69%. I think he's going to be on the cusp of election, looking for next year. Schelling has fallen to about 60%. There's no way he's getting in this year. Todd Helton is at about 57%, making solid headway forward. I think we're looking probably at about, I would say still probably about a 2 or 3 year climb ahead of him, but definitely trending in the right direction. Once you get to 50%, it's generally a matter of time. I had to finally retire this caveat, but until the November election, the December ERA committee election, Gil Hodges was the only candidate to get to 50% and never get in, aside from the candidates who are currently on the ballot. Now that he's in, we're going to replace them with Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling until any of them breaks through in the ERA committee process. So yeah, it's really Ortiz or bust. Like I said, I'm hopeful that Ortiz gets in, but if he doesn't, it's going to be pretty clear that he's going in next year.
So let's take a moment. Secretary of State Alex Marks, if you could notify the electorate of the results of the Rocky Mountain SABR chapter.
I'd be happy to, Mr. President. So everyone, for those of you who participated, thank you very much for voting. We had 33 respondents in the 2022 mock Hall of Fame ballot. So following the current Hall of Fame guidelines, that would mean you would need a candidate would need to be on a ballot at least 25 ballots following the 75% threshold. So with all the votes tallied, we had 2 people that qualified. I think everyone can probably figure out who one of them was, being a local fan favorite. The other ones was a little bit of a surprise, but not really maybe. I think it spoke volumes from the chapter who they viewed qualifies. So with further ado, I will bring up the results. And here we go. Oops, sorry. So I have highlighted the 2 candidates in yellow that received the necessary Votes. Todd Helton, the top vote getter at 90.91% of the votes he received. He was on 30 of the 33 ballots. The second person was David Ortiz, just barely made it at 25 of the 33 ballots, 75.76%. Those were the only two that qualified. There were a number that received double digits votes. As you can see down here, Scott Roland was the next closest, receiving 60.61% of the votes, 20 out of the 33 ballots. The next closest one, I believe, if you scroll up, was Barry Bonds at 42.42% of the ballots, 14 of the 33. Then came Roger Clemens at 13, tied with Curt Schilling. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. There was someone else who got fourth closest. That was Billy Wagner. 48.49% of the ballots got on 16. So after David Ortiz, it went Scott Roland and then Billy Wagner, and then Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling. There were some others that received double digits. Alex Rodriguez and then Andrew Jones received 10. But everyone else received some votes. I think everyone on the ballot, as I recall seeing, got a vote from someone. So that was very good. That was very interesting that all 30 available got at least one vote. So the one also thing I'll note is that for other, there were 3 people that wrote in a ballot. The 3 write-ins were Shoeless Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, and I wish Manny Rendao was on the call because he would be so excited to hear this. Fred, the crime dog McGriff, got a vote. So that was your total ballot for the 2022 Mock Hall of Fame, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State. We appreciate it. Patrick Lyons points out in the chat that this election reality actually mirrors our chapter. I mean, after all, come on, right? And our chapter, just like reality, every player on the ballot is going to get a vote this year. So it's kind of fun. Jay, we're going to open it up in a moment, but
Sure.
Who for you, and for those of you who haven't read Jay's Cooperstown Casebook, man, it rocks. It's outstanding. I read it on a trip to Japan and loved it. It was just a terrific read. Who for you is the omission that you're really the most passionate about?
We're talking on the writer's ballot or just in general?
Yeah, in general, who isn't in Cooperstown that you think should be?
Yeah, I think my 1-2 going into the ERA committee elections were Minnie Minoso and Dick Allen. Got to see Minoso elected, albeit posthumously, which, a bit of a disappointment that he wasn't alive to see it. But just a fascinating story of a transformational figure in baseball history in terms of the significance he had to Black and Latino baseball. And then Dick Allen, whose career was shaped by the racism he encountered, particularly in the Philly system, and just a very misunderstood player. Covered by an all-white press corps that never once gave him the benefit of the doubt, it seemed. And I think that really kind of shaped the way he was perceived and the way he's continued to be perceived, in a lot of quarters. Those two are the top. I think on the next tier, Bobby Grich is somebody I feel passionately about.
Yeah.
He's a top 10 second baseman in Jaws. Chase Utley is a little bit below him, but also there. He's obviously not eligible yet, but I'm looking forward to when he is. Mm-hmm. Scott Roland is probably my passion project on the current ballot. Andrew Jones, to a lesser extent, but also there. But Roland is I think kind of comes from the Tim Raines and Larry Walker and Edgar Martinez vein of guys who were just thoroughly underappreciated by voters at the start of their candidacies, and we're seeing many people get turned on to just how good they are. Let's see a few others. Lou Whitaker, somebody from the book. I think he should have gone in alongside Alan Trammell and gratified that he's actually on the ballot now, or was on the ballot last time. And he went one and done until Ted Simmons was elected in 2020 on the 2020 ballot. There had never been a candidate who had gone one and done on the writer's ballot, which means got less than 5% of the vote and was consigned to oblivion. Nobody had ever come back from that, even to get on an era committee ballot until Simmons did, and he gradually built some support. I'm hoping, Whitaker has now at least got some support. I'm hopeful that at some point Bobby Grich gets that same treatment. Down the road, I think David Cohn, when I look at the starting pitchers, and I'm using a slightly revised system of JAWS called S-JAWS, which is trying to blunt the impact of the 19th century guys who were throwing 500 innings at a time. And to a lesser extent, the dead ball era guys who were throwing 300, and even the Gaylord Perrys and Steve Carltons of the world who were throwing 300 innings frequently. Just an adjustment there because we're not going to see a lot of big innings guys in the future here, the way the game is changing. And I think the system that I've set up might need even further refinement to put the more recent careers into perspective. But Cone is kind of in this intermediate zone there, but I think he stands up pretty well. You look at the postseason stuff as well. I think he's, the fact that he lost a bit of his career to the strike, pretty interesting pitcher, pretty interesting candidate, I think. Looking forward to Joe Mauer and Buster Posey. They're not eligible yet, but I think both should be in the Hall of Fame. Bill Dolan, I was kind of bummed that Bill Dolan didn't get elected on the era committee ballot, but the Negro Leagues candidates, I'm only just begun to scratch the surface of my understanding of that area. It was a real education to do the research and write about those guys. And I think that there are a lot of interesting figures there. I haven't really quite landed on who I think should be first there. Dick Redding is awful impressive to me. Vic Harris is impressive. But there are people who just statistically feel that John Beckwith should be ahead of them. He wasn't even on the ballot. I find the story of John Donaldson very compelling, but people have reservations about the fact that he didn't spend his career, as much of his career facing the top flight talent. But there's a whole bunch of guys in that realm that I'm only starting to learn about.
That's awesome. All right, in a moment, we're going to open it up to questions. But first, with referee Jay Jaffe here, we have a SABR mug. It's one of those dugout mugs.
Oh, wow.
That is going to go, not to you, Jay. It's too big a prize for you. I'm sorry. Okay. But to the individual in the chat who can answer this question accurately with our one-person referee team, because I know is the answer. Whoever gets the first correct answer in the chat will be the recipient of this really cool SABR dugout mug celebrating the 50th anniversary. It's one of the huge
Uh-oh.
You're frozen, Dan. I think we lost him.
This is just part of the suspense,
Jeopardy theme.
There he goes. He's back. You're back, sir.
I'm sorry. It was, what it was? It was all the feedback on the mug. That's what it was. So the question is in the chat room, of position players, what position has the most people in the Hall of Fame? With Jay Jaffe as the referee, and we're talking specific, we're not talking pitchers because there are more starters than any other position, but what position? And Donna, I believe, is the winner. Jay, are you in the chat?
I'll say I'm looking at the chat here. It looks to me like it's Michael Clark. If the bubble is below who wrote, because the answer we have the answer here. The answer is right field. There are 28 right fielders in the Hall of Fame, 28 non-Negro Leagues right fielders, and it looks like Michael Clark was the first one to weigh in. Just a punch by a hair was Patrick Lyons, second, but unfortunately there's no second place in this.
Greetings from Kauai, Hawaii. I just barely got on in time to hear the question, but I've heard Jay, and it sounds great. I have given that mug, not the 50th anniversary, as a gift, so it's great to get one. Thank you.
Good going, Michael. I hope you're enjoying Hawaii.
Oh, hard to miss.
So before we do questions, what I'd love you to do is I'd love you to either raise your hand or operate in the chat room. Jay, I want to call attention to one person. We have a 90-year-old ex-teammate of Warren Spahn of the Milwaukee Braves on our call. He's one of our chapter members. He is the crown jewel of our chapter, Herb Shankman. Just wanted to say hello to Herb. He's got his Brave jersey in the background. He was, it's a great story, Jay. Herb's a great dude. And it's a fabulous story how Herb got that jersey and got into pro baseball.
Nice.
But Alex, if you could be the gatekeeper now of any Q&A, and Jay, thank you for sticking around. We really appreciate it. Questions, comments for Jay, go ahead. And Alex, you're the man on this one.
So first, we can get questions either in the chat, or if you want to electronically raise your hand, there's an electronic hand raise function. It puts you at the top. So the first person is Mike Caveu. So go ahead, Mike.
That's Coview. But okay.
Coview. My apologies, sir.
People usually try to make it a lot more complicated than that. I wanted to relate something, since you had somebody with a connection to Warren Spahn. I wanted to relate a story a good friend of mine told me about growing up in Milwaukee. When he was 9 years old, he had a group of his friends, fourth graders, were walking home, and they knew what apartment building Warren Spahn and Lou Burdett shared an apartment in. And they thought, well, we'll just knock on the door and see if they'll give us their autographs. So they did. I think it was fourth graders. Lou Burdett answered the door, invited them in, and spent 2 hours talking about baseball to these 9-year-olds. I don't think that could happen today. The other thing I wanted to mention is I'm calling from Ames, Iowa, and I did want to say hello to Dan. And I do hope we do have a meeting in Dyersville.
Well, Michael, we will definitely host a SABR meeting at the Field of Dreams this spring or summer. I promise you. I know somebody there who can get that place, and we can have a lot of fun. What part of Ames do you live?
I live in South Ames. But I've lived here about 12 years since. But I also want to mention one other thing. I had the pleasure of being at Coors Field for the first time this summer. I'm a lifelong Tigers fan, but that experience in Coors Field was the best experience I've ever had at a major league ballpark. And I tell folks here at the Iowa Cubs games, that San Burnaby, our long-term president and general manager, I said, I hope you understand what I'm saying here when I tell you that I told the guest relations person at Susie, who I don't think is on this call, and I don't know her last name, but she helped us out in a variety of ways this summer. I told her that this is the first time a major league team has ever treated me like I'm used to being treated by our hometown AAA team. And that's a compliment, not a criticism.
Well, that's outstanding. Mike, I'm going to follow up with you because we're definitely going to do that with your chapter without any question.
Now, you've been in touch with Steve Ellsbury, right?
Yes, I have.
Steve's the key person in getting this done. So,
yeah.
I'm just the treasurer, not the president.
That's okay. But I know somebody there. We can do that. So we'll have some fun there.
Okay.
So you have any questions for Jay, Mike?
Well, I was going to say, you may have mentioned it, and I kind of got slightly diverted, but my bug about the Hall of Fame is Lou Whitaker. And remember I've said I'm a lifelong Tigers fan. I also would love to see Bill Freehan in, but in
Bill
Lou
Freehan's a good
Whitaker's
one.
case, I think the case for him being in the Hall is pretty reasonable, but it's an arguable case. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but I think the fact that he fell off the ballot after the first round is the most outrageous injustice in Hall of Fame voting. It's just beyond belief. And it's attributable to some Detroit writers who didn't vote for him because they didn't like it. By the way, Bill James made the case that at least one of those writers was acting out of racial animus.
I hadn't heard that part of it, but I do know, if I'm remembering correctly, that Joe Falls did not include him on the ballot. It wasn't as common in those days for people to do ballot explainers, but Falls was in the Sporting News as well as whichever Detroit paper it was that he wrote for. And I when I was doing, as a SABR member, having access to that wonderful Sporting News archive, that helped form a good amount of the research that I did for the book. And I came across his column, and even he couldn't find room, if I remembered correctly. Whitaker's a case. It's funny. Whitaker, I have Gritch ahead of Whitaker, but I included them both in the book because I think they're both worthy additions. Whitaker's the guy with the career value advantage. Gritch is the guy with the peak value advantage. Better defender, higher value, like legitimate MVP candidate. Whitaker was very good at a lot of things, but never really put together a massive season that turned heads, even the way that like Alan Trammell did, in 1987. And I think he's suffered for that. I have probably written more inscriptions in the casebook to fans of Lou Whitaker than any other candidate, though. I just did one for the father of a colleague last week, in fact. So you are not alone in your belief that Lou Whitaker belongs in the Hall of Fame. And yes, I think that Bill Freehan was grossly overlooked. I was surprised when I went back and found that he was a one and done guy. The Tigers wore him down to the nub, and he didn't get much support on the ballot. I was surprised given how many All-Star appearances he had, double-digit total, and he just went without a trace. And I wondered, I've never read the book. I only just got a hold of it after he passed away, but I've never read his Behind the Mask book. I wondered the extent to which that must have ruffled some feathers in its day. I know it was never been cited as anything nearly as revelatory or inflammatory as Ball 4, but I know it was seen as being, kind of a violation of the sanctity of the clubhouse, blah, blah, blah. And I wonder if that hurt him.
So next up was Glenn Russell, but he's lowered his hand. So Glenn, if you want to speak, just raise your electronic hand again. And the next person is Patrick Lyons.
Hey Jay, good talking with you again. This might be too specific of a question, but I'm thinking you might know. I was doing some research. Do you know why Don Baylor made a second ballot in 1995 after getting just 2.6% of the vote in 94? And then Dick Allen was only on 14 ballots. He didn't get a 15th, even though he got 16.7% in 1997.
So Baylor, I'm not sure what happened with Baylor here. I'm pulling it up on my phone, which is why I'm not looking directly at the camera here. I'm just trying to see what happened there. That's
You got the same amount of votes in both years, which is kind of strange too.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. There might be a story there. Yeah, he should have been one and done. Somehow he stuck around. Interesting. I'd never seen that before. You see, occasionally you come across, strange error, like the on Baseball Reference, there are votes recorded that were, invalid. There's Minnie Minoso got votes on the 1969 ballot, despite the fact that he wasn't eligible yet. Which I haven't figured out if that was a clerical error or exactly what was going on there. But that was one that stuck out to me. As for Allen, so Allen was one of, like Ron Santo and Veda Pinson and a few other players. Allen was one of those players who got an amnesty in 1985. So the 5% rule was put into place in 1979, revised slightly in 1980. And then in 1985, after it had been applied for a few years, they basically brought 13 guys back to the ballot to give them one more shot at getting the necessary 5% to continue. And I think Allen and Santo were two of the ones who obviously got to continue. But even with that, you're on a clock. The rules are you have to, you've been retired for at least 5 years and no more than 20 years or something like that. Now it's at least 5 and no more than 15 years. So I guess somewhere in there, he must have crossed over and hit the limit there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's my guess. It used to be, before the days of having annual elections, which the writers have voted at times annually, biennially, triennially. It's changed, kind of based on the frequency with which players were elected and wartime and things like that being factors too. But it's been annual ever since 1966. And before then, when you've got guys reaching eligibility starting in 1958 or 60 or whatever, and crossing into that era, figuring out how many ballots they've been on versus how many years since retirement. You have to go by how many years since retirement. And Allen doesn't fit into that, but it does get kind of tricky in there, for some of those guys. So I guess that's my assumption is why he only got, because 20 years was 1977. Yeah, that would have been his last one in 97. So he lost some time in there because of that, because he was on in 83. So basically he only missed one vote in 1984. So he had reached the limit by the time he got it. Now, unfortunately, it wouldn't have made a difference because he never even got 20%.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Next up is Mr. Kurt Wells.
Hey, Jay, you had alluded earlier to Todd Helton's numbers climbing a little bit because of Gil Hodges getting in. And it made me wonder, and in particular on your own voting, how much do you look at the lower level players and say, well, he's better than this guy who's already in, so I want to put him in. Do you use that as a gauge much, and do you worry about it maybe diluting the Hall of Fame players? More
the latter. The explicit goal of JAWS is to identify the players who are as good or better than the average Hall of Famer at their position. That's the off-the-shelf use of the tool. You have some leeway in there once you know that you've got some leeway. Well, this guy had big postseasons. This guy had some big history stuff here. He was kept in the minors for too long. There's some subjective considerations that should inform that. And help put in perspective the number that you're looking at. I generally don't want to get in the habit of looking at the lowest common denominator by any means, because, if we're going by Harold Baines, we're letting everybody in, or Jim Rice or whoever. But a popularly acclaimed guy like Vladimir Guerrero, who's mid-table among right fielders, I think, and I've referenced in my ballot discussion, I think is more fair game to say, well, if people feel that this guy is in and this guy's better than him and this guy's better than him, well, then I can make a stronger case that hey, if you think Vlad's a good enough player for the Hall of Fame, then here's two other guys who were slightly better in terms of WAR, at least. Didn't get the same attention, didn't have the MVP seasons, but here's my argument for them. But I don't think you want to get trapped in that lowest common denominator argument, because then you're really diluting things. Now, I want to clarify one thing you said about Helton. It's not so much that Helton's numbers got better; it's that the standard got lowered just a fraction there, and that helped his cause.
Yeah, you've answered my question. I like what you're saying about using the average in the middle, and maybe Todd climbed toward the average more, as opposed to using the bottom line players. I probably just kind of misunderstood something there, so thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay, next up is Judy Freeman.
Oh, I'm that's my better half.
Oh,
This is Bruce Hellerstein, and
sorry,
Jay,
Bruce.
it's fabulous presentation, and just can't wait to get your book, and really appreciate your participation and everything. Mine is more of a philosophical. I'm kind of the Clint Eastwood, kind of the trouble with the curve type approach to these things, using my gut rather than all the stats and everything. To me, the Hall of Fame should be a very select group, and there's certain players that, just like no-brainers. And it always amazes me that you guys don't get in unanimously for that reason, but I guess it's all part of the politics. But to me, the guy was a great player. Not very good, not longevity, a great player. And that's what I use as my test, and thrilled to death to see like a Gil Hodges in, the Minnie Minoso. I think Dick Allen is a total no-brainer. He was a great ball player. Controversial, yes, but he was definitely a Hall of Fame player in my book. I think Omar Vizquel is a Hall of Fame player. Defense, I think defensive stuff doesn't take enough consideration a lot of times. Obviously, shortstop's important, but looking at the current list of players, I don't have in front of me, I think David Ortiz is a no-brainer. And I think Omar is on the list there. I'd have to look at it, but those are the kind of guys that they got to just knock you over. And to weigh in, well, this guy did this and that's that and all that. My philosophy is just, I think sometimes, analysis by paralysis, and it just can get a little convoluted along that way. Just curious, Jay, your thoughts on that.
Well, one person's no doubter is another person's no way. It's Omar Vizquel, for example. I think he was a visually impressive shortstop, but as I've come to understand the defensive metrics, there's a big gap between Omar and Ozzie Smith. There's an even bigger gap between Omar and Ozzie on the offensive side, because what Ozzie was doing, he was doing in a much lower offensive context, and he had the base running to contribute the value there. So I see a clear distinction between those two. There are guys that knock me out, but they knock me out in part because I have brought to it this the statistical appreciation hand in hand with the visual. Scott Roland. I don't know if I needed a number to tell me that Scott Roland was a fantastic third baseman. I saw it, enough times. Because that guy was was everywhere, but the numbers bolster it. And same with Andrew Jones and center field. I mean, I think it's interesting. People love to complain about fielding metrics. Well, you look at the Baseball Reference all-time fielding rankings. You've got Mark Belanger and Ozzie Smith, number 1 and number 2 at shortstop. You've got Roberto Clemente, number 1 in right field. Brooks Robinson, number 1 at third base. Andrew Jones and Willie Mays, 1 and 2 in center field. There's not a lot to complain about when you've got rankings like that. I mean, yeah, lower down, there's less agreement. But when you've got these guys who are winning, wheelbarrows full of Gold Gloves, and the metrics back it, I think you can feel more confident in the metrics. And I've somebody who, especially because I didn't have access to a lot of baseball growing up, I've had to learn to appreciate the numbers as well as watching them. So I think, I think the gut, there's value to it, but there's also, we have to understand our biases there, and not only our own, but just the way that for example, I think a player in a large market gets seen by more eyes and gets talked about more in a Hall of Fame context. A Derek Jeter versus a Larry Walker or Todd Helton, for example. Obviously, Derek Jeter's got the World Series things, the 3,000 hits, the numbers. He's a no-brainer. I'm not making an argument against him, but there are other players that do what they do outside of that that spotlight, and not as many people got to see them, but we do understand them as no doubter. Joey Votto, I think, is a good example.
Yes.
So I think there are lots of ways to look at it, and ultimately, I think the most satisfying ones are the ones where our eyes align with the other information that we get.
I was just going to add too, and just taking my way of thinking a little further is, and I'm sure that takes a lot of weight on this stuff. Being Rookie of the Year, MVP, World Championship, Cy Young, Gold Gloves. If a player achieves those consistently, I think that's a big deal. To be Rookie of the Year is a big deal. And it's, you go down the list, and most time these guys are Hall of Famers. I don't know what the stats are, but MVP, the same thing. So I think that says a lot, because that is your true measure of against your peers. And
well, we also know now that I mean, there are some biases in the voting in terms of it being overly weighted towards the MVP voting, for example, overly weighted towards RBI guys that maybe not didn't get on base as much, didn't have as much value on the defensive side. Where we probably should have been looking at more shortstops and Alan Trammell as opposed to a George Bell or something like that. On Cy Young Awards, looking too much at won-loss records and not enough at other metrics, ERA, strikeout rate, run support, because run support colors won-loss records, things like that. You have to remember that the awards are subjective judgments, and subjective judgments are not infallible. And they're important considerations, and you want to take note of those when you're considering a player's Hall of Fame case. But you don't want to be overly swayed by the presence or absence of one thing, in determining the case. I mean, just because Bobby Abreu was only a 3-time All-Star doesn't mean I'm not going to give him a long look when I'm filling out my Hall of Fame ballot. And likewise, just because somebody won a ton of Gold Gloves doesn't mean he was automatically the best fielder in his position. We've got metrics that can tell us that Derek Jeter was overrated, for example, defensively and things like that. So you want all the information you can, and you want to try to figure it out. And I honestly, what else are you going to do? I mean, it's if it were just if it were just to get back from the going from the gut, and there should only be a small handful of Hall of Famers. What I've done in the book is try to show in terms of historical levels of representation that the last 50 years are grossly underrepresented within the Hall of Fame, and that voters are being too stingy when it comes to Hall of Famers. Let's remember, the Hall of Fame is an institution that exists to stay open to the public, to make money, to sustain itself. If the last guy who gets in is Willie Mays, pretty soon people aren't going to be coming around to the Hall of Fame anymore. We've got to keep putting in players from more recent eras to keep the Hall of Fame relevant, or it doesn't have value if it doesn't if it doesn't keep abreast of more recent baseball history.
Hey, Alex, before you go to the next point, Bruce Hellerstein is the owner of the National Ballpark Museum, just a block away from Coors Field. And Bruce has been kind enough, we're on the Boulder Collegians Board of Directors together, and Bruce has been kind enough to allow us to conduct a chapter meeting at his museum sometime in 2022. So that's something our board chatted about. Bruce, I think it's a really wonderful offer. We're going to be thrilled to come and hang out at your place. For those of you who haven't gone, man, his place rocks. It is just a great place. So Jay, if you're ever in Denver, right down the street from Coors, what a wonderful place to visit.
Oh, cool.
Thank you, Dan. I can't thank you enough on that. And we'd be honored to have Jay, or obviously all the SABR members, and really appreciate all the great words on that. And yeah, it's fun to discuss this stuff. And obviously there's no fixed answer on it, but I think, to me, you don't want to dilute the Hall of Fame. And when you start having borderline players get in, I think it takes a little steam out of it sometimes. I'll just end it with one example, and this is just how my mind operates. You look at center field, you look at Mickey and Willie and Duke, and they're total no-brainers. When you start talking about Andrew Jones, that's a whole different level in my book. So that's kind of where I look at things.
The one thing I'd say about it is that nobody did more to dilute the Hall of Fame than the Veterans Committee by electing all the guys from the 20s and 30s and 40s. It's not a new thing to feel like the Hall of Fame has been diluted. This has been going on for 75 years almost. You can't use Willie Mays as the yardstick for everybody, because if you do, there's only one Willie Mays. Nobody's ever going to measure up. Joe Poznansky did a great series on this. It's like, yeah, well, he was no Willie Mays. Well, there was only one Willie Mays. If you've got to, our Hall of Fame has to be larger than that. And I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, but thanks for your input.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it. And thanks again, Dan, for kind words.
You're welcome.
So we have a question from our good member, Chris Moyer, in the chat room. So Jay, I'll read his question if you don't see it. Jay, with the development of the Negro Leagues statistics, do you think there will be some analytical stats in the next few years that could be used to compare segregated era leagues versus Major League Baseball players from that era?
Yeah, boy, that's a really good question. I have not really figured out how to grapple with the wealth of Negro Leagues data that we have. Adam Darowski, who does the Hall of Stats project, which is a kind of a parallel system to mine that uses kind of an index score. So where 100 is the average Hall of Famer, and a guy who's a 120 is 20% better than the average Hall of Famer in his position, has just started using some stuff that he worked on with a guy named Eric Chalek, Chalek, who himself has his own Hall of Fame project. and it's based on using major league equivalencies for those Negro League seasons and trying to figure out what the equivalent of, a guy hitting 375, slugging 600 in a 50-game Negro League season that we have data for in this context, what that equates to on a neutral major league level, and figuring out, where is this comparable in value. And I looked at his stuff a lot. This is Eric's stuff. When I was writing about the Negro Leagues candidates for the Hall of Fame. I have not yet figured out how to integrate this stuff with my own system. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether the Hall does decide to move up the next Negro Leagues election. It's currently scheduled to not happen for another 10 years, but I think there's so much great research going on in that field that it would be a shame to squander this level of interest and the wealth of resources that we've got, including the book that Dan mentioned, The Negro Leagues Were Major Leagues, and the whole movement around that to appreciate it. So it's something I'm hoping in the next year or so that I will start to get a better handle on. Certainly if I do a sequel or update of the casebook, it's an issue I'm going to have to confront. I was among the people who suggested that on those position pages at Baseball Reference, I'm not really comfortable with the fact that we've used JAWS kind of automatically for the Negro Leagues players, but it's there. But I advocated to include a WAR per 162 games figure so that you could look at that. And if you wanted to sort by that, you could see Josh Gibson float to the top of the catchers or something like that. I think it's always going to be very difficult and require a whole lot of assumptions and math to really figure out how to compare the Negro Leagues players to their contemporaries. But it should at least give us a sense of just how much greatness was kept out of the major leagues, and hopefully we can continue to identify worthy admissions to the Hall of Fame from among that group. I think we got a nice start on it, but obviously there was more that could be admitted in one election, and I'm eager to see what happens and how quickly it happens again.
So we have the next person with their hand up is Mr. Ken Reed.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it. It's been very interesting. You made a case for several players that you thought deserved to be in that aren't in. I'm curious as to your thought on a couple players maybe that you believe don't deserve it that are in the Hall of Fame, and who those names might be.
I joked, the subtitle of this book, it's who's in the Hall of Fame, who should be in, and who should pack their plaques, which was a line I came up with a friend in 2007, 10 years before the book actually was published. And it was an appropriately snarky title for the time, because I wasn't in the BBWA, I wasn't in press boxes. I could be the jokester lobbing bombs at the BBWA. Once I got in the press box and had to be a bit more diplomatic in my player evaluations, and that kind of extended to the Hall of Fame. And really what I found is, for all of the joking about who's going to pack their plaques, and I did use the term the basement when I was ranking these guys in kind of rough tiers, is that my job was more to appreciate who's in the Hall of Fame, even if I don't think they really belong there. But the ones that really stood out to me, I think there's a few off the top of my head. Tommy McCarthy, a 19th century outfielder who probably should have been in there more as a pioneer than anything else. He helped invent, I think it's the hit and run, the pop-up slide, the relay throw, some techniques. And he had a few good years in some lesser leagues, but not a very long career. He was elected in 1945 or 46. And I think he has the lowest WAR of any position player in the Hall. Rick Farrell, catcher, and Ray Schalk, the two bottom of the barrel catchers, are two that I don't think should be in. Rick Farrell is not even as good as his brother Wes, who was a pitcher in the 30s and who was I think a much stronger candidate for election, although he didn't even get on the most recent early baseball era committee ballot. Lloyd Wagner, the lesser of the two Wagner brothers. I think he's the lowest ranked center fielder in Jaws. Jim Bottomley and George High Pockets Kelly, the lowest ranked first baseman. And what's funny is a lot of these guys came in the same way. They were elected by veterans committees that had either Frankie Frisch or Bill Terry on them in the late 60s and early 70s. Not all of them did that, but they are responsible for electing some of the weakest guys in the Hall of Fame. And it would be nice to undo those elections. So I think that's probably where I would put that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
Nice
it.
pilots. Nice pilot's cap, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
have a Jim Bouton jersey from Mitchell and Ness that my friends pitched in and got me for my 30th birthday. I wore it to one of these recently. I think it was the might have been the Bob Davids chapter one Zoom that I did a few weeks ago.
No pilots that are going in the hall?
No, I don't think so, unfortunately. Well, someday Lou Piniella could get in as a manager, but his pilot's time was pretty short.
That's right.
Next, we have Mr. Dixie Tarango.
Tarango, yes.
Thanks, sir.
Gentlemen, good evening. The mention of the ballparks museum is a good segue to me, since I live 1 mile from the location of the South End grounds of the 19th century, the Huntington Avenue grounds of the dead ball era, and Fenway Park is 1 mile away from me. And since that's the case, and we have one guy in Hawaii tonight, this might be the vastest SABR chapter meeting on Zoom in history. Over the last week and a half, I have attended maybe 6 SABR meetings in different chapters, and there always seems to be a topic of this kind of who's going in and who should go in. And it's good for me to hear that Scott Roland and Todd Helton have good chances of getting in, because they were my 2 favorite players of the last of the 20th century into the 21st century. And I didn't think that maybe Scott Roland was going to have much of a chance, since he missed the equivalent of 3 seasons due to injuries. But it's good to hear that people appreciate his play. The other thing I thought about as I was attending all these meetings is that if you took just the people who attended those meetings and asked them to put down on a piece of paper 25 players or managers or whatever for who they thought they wanted in the Hall of Fame, and you took all of those votes from maybe 200 or 300 SABR members and added them all up and took away the duplicates, you would probably get 100 to 150 more people in the Hall of Fame than there are now. Jay, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Every baseball fan has an opinion about the Hall of Fame, and has their pet candidate that they'd want to see in there, and that's part of the fun of doing this. It's not the screeching about Barry Bonds and Omar Vizquel and Kurt Schilling. That's the fun of it. That's the other end of the spectrum. It's like hearing about. Yeah, I wish this guy was in. I wish Dale Murphy was in. I wish that we've all we go around the room and we could probably come up with everybody's got one that's unique here, like you said. That's the fun of it. And I've stumbled into this wonderful niche that people have these strong opinions and like to talk about their guys with their favorites, and it ultimately gets back to why does this matter? Baseball fans feel a passion for their Hall of Fame much more so than football or basketball or any of the other halls of fame, and I think that's unique to the sport. And in my book I try to answer that, and I think a lot of it has to do with it's a piece of us that we want validated. reward us for our fandom of, sticking the lean years out with, this team or that team, or being on to Scott Roland when he was a rookie, or whatever. It's we want to celebrate that part of ourselves. I think in hope, in our hopefuls for the Hall of Fame.
Jay, I can't thank you enough. It's 10:37 on the East Coast. Paul Parker, you'll be happy to know that Jay lives in Brooklyn. So, but Jay, I am so grateful for you coming on and spending 90 plus minutes with us. Just fascinating. It is so much fun to hear your passion, your awareness, and to educate us further about something that's really important to all of us. So we're all grateful for your time, and thank you so very much for being on this call with us.
Hey, it was my pleasure. The conversation we had yesterday, and just the back and forth earlier, it's just, this is why I do it. I love to talk about this stuff, and I'm pleased that people have caught on to it, that people, within the industry take it seriously, that people do want to go out and buy the book. And I will say, by the way, no hard sell here. If you do want to buy the book, if you're interested in having it personalized, you can, on my Twitter feed, at the top of the pinned tweet at the top of the feed, there's a bookstore in Brooklyn. It's about a mile away. I go there every couple of weeks to sign the occasional copy. If you want one that's, to a Lou Whitaker fan, or, whoever your pet candidate is, or your father's pet candidate, or your cousin's pet candidate, or whoever you're buying that gift for, I'm happy to do personalized inscriptions and the like. It's going to cost you more than it'll cost you on Amazon, but it's a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn, and that's something that my passion extends to keeping places like that going. So if anybody wants one of those and can't find it, I'm sure to ask Dan, and he'll point you in the right direction here. But thank you all for coming.
Jay.
Thank you all for coming, and it's great to talk about this stuff with y'all.
Don't jump off, folks. We're going to talk some more ball. And Jay, if you want to hang out with us, you can, obviously. But follow Jay on Twitter. He's J_Jaffe, Jaffe, or read him every day on FanGraphs. It's just great. He is so informative and probing. It's a lot of fun. Thanks again, Jay. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you all. Good to see some familiar faces out there, and we'll see you on other venues here, but I'm going to log off for now. So thanks again.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Jay.
Jay.
All right, let's talk some ball, folks. We've been talking about Hall of Famers. First thing we should probably talk about is the labor situation in the game. Obviously, it's costing us the hot stove league, which, it's really funny. I don't think anybody uses hot stove anymore, but there were negotiations last week for the first time in about a month. Didn't lead to any, obviously, decisions. There's no deadlines in place right now, but they are talking again. Everything that I'm hearing, that I have read, indicates that the discourse was quite good this week. What you all need to know is many of the items that are under discussion have been under discussion for 4 or 5 years. I was on that committee for 3 different labor contracts, and many of the articles of the labor agreement, which, if you're interested, go on the Major League Baseball Players Association, MLBPA.org. It's in English and Spanish, and you can read all 360 plus pages of the labor agreement. But many of the things that are under discussion have already been negotiated and finalized. It's the final pieces that always get done at the end. So I think there's, it's the 18th of January. There isn't going to be a decision in the next couple of days, but I encourage you all to follow Evan Drellich of The Athletic. He's the best writer on labor strife. Maury Brown is great. Barry Bloom is fantastic with Sportico. follow the people who follow the labor negotiations. And, you're seeing announcements by clubs about their spring training schedules, about mid-spring training jaunts. You're seeing announcements here and there. So the clubs are moving forward in some cases. They're actually hiring people in some cases. So, we're not going to know much because both sides have a gag order to try to keep their members in check. So only the principals are the ones discussing things. So if you have comments, questions, but candidly, there isn't going to be any immediate movement, and there never is anywhere without a deadline in place.
Dan, may I add that there's a podcast called The Athletic, and two of the most relevant people are Evan Drellick, who at least before the lockout was talking every Wednesday. I think that's on a lower schedule until things pick up, but check that out. So there may be one tomorrow. And then Ken Rosenthal has his mailbag, plus he appears with Drellick on Drellick's podcast. So just go to theathletic.com and look for the most recent podcast. It's free.
Dan, what do you think are the most sticking issues left, the one or two issues that are going to be the hardest to come together on?
Well, I think there's an influx of cash in the game because of gambling. So I think that's got to be distributed. It has to be discussed and placed somehow into the labor agreement, Kenny. I think service time manipulation is something that's been discussed, brought up, grievances, whatnot. Expanded postseason is something that's come up. I think in the most recent proposal, the clubs offered 14 teams. I think expansion will be an issue. And for the owners, they will like expansion because it's a cash infusion. And I also think tanking is a subject that is going to be prominent. Tanking is a very big issue in the game right now, and a pretty ugly thing in some markets. And I think that, along with a potential floor on spending, are going to be items that will come up in those negotiations.
Is there a tanking solution that you like?
Yeah, do a better job before you tank. I'm really not kidding. If you're inept, you have to tank. If you're good, if you're the Cardinals, you don't tank because you don't have to. You're the Dodgers, you don't have to. You're the Yankees, you don't have to. The clubs that have inept player development and scouting get underwater, and then they have to tank. And, to me, it's an indictment of your decision-making in previous years that causes usually a personnel change and then causes the owner to decide to blow it up and try not to win. And everybody points to the Astros, and some people point to the Cubs, but there's a whole lot more teams that didn't do it very well. And they're, I would say, as a friend of mine says, their reported tanking ended up in unintentional tanking.
Yeah, I was going to throw out the Astros, but you're right. There's a lot more failures than a success story.
Anybody else have any comments before we move to another topic?
Dan, Chris Moyer posted a comment in the chat room and said, could the issue on the future of regional sports networks be an issue for some of the smaller teams' finances?
That's a great question, Chris. It really has been a big issue across the sport. A lot of the mid to small markets lost their regional networks, and as a result, really lost a significant cash flow into their organization. But at the same time, the Fox and other partner deals escalated significantly. So there is some offset, and that's one of the many things. Remember, all these funds are pooled into the central fund and then negotiated as part of the labor agreement. So, the clubs have to be open and transparent with the Players Association in regards to these things. So Chris, I'm sure that's come up.
Dan, before you go somewhere else, what's the story with Trevor Story?
I don't understand, Thomas. What do you mean?
Is he going to stay or is he going to leave?
Oh, I bet the ranch. I used to say I bet the ranch. I'll say I'll bet the farm
You go.
that he's not coming back to the Rockies. There's no way.
Dan,
They had their chance. I think that ship sailed.
Dan, would you go so far as to say you would wager an acreage of corn, perhaps?
I would wager 193 acres of corn, actually. I don't think Thomas, there's any chance he's coming back. I think when they didn't trade him and he didn't play that night, to me, that was a major statement that they not only aired, but they also cut the cord permanently for him. And I just, they haven't made cash outlays on players like him that have left. I think he's going to go somewhere else. And I personally think he's one of the best shortstops in the game. And I think it's a massive mistake by the franchise. And, a draft pick with a team that has not selected very well, I thought that was a very poor trade-off.
All right, thanks.
How about
Yeah, I think-
John Gray, they thought they actually had, and they butchered that one too.
Well, I think going back to the Trevor Story thing for a minute, if you think back to when they signed Nolan Arenado, the smart sign would have been to sign Trevor Story at that time because they could have gotten a better deal and they probably could have bought some of his free agent years. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing to do in the game is to try to sign your own player after he's filed for free agency, because players after their 5th year tend not to sign and they go into the market because they don't have risk. Should they get hurt, they have a platform that people pay for. But once players have received free agent rights and have filed, very, very few return to their former club for their initial foray into free agency.
But who's going to get Trevor Story now is my question. Who's going to go for him? Because there's a lot of money out there and some of them, going to Texas. And of course, Correa's out there. And I love Trevor Story, by the way, but who do you think's going to get him? It's going to be I worry because nobody snapped him up yet. Both he and Freddie Freeman haven't been snapped up yet.
Patrick?
I think he is he's going to have a lot of suitors because anyone who doesn't want to go after Carlos Correa can pay half the price and get just as good of a player in Trevor Story. So if you don't want to spend $300 million on Carlos Correa, 150 will get the job done pretty handily for Story. So, Houston could be a really perfect spot. Seattle and Boston have talked about him, playing third base for them. In Boston, Rafael Devers would go over to second base. Some clubs have said, Story could be the second baseman, kind of do what Marcus Semien did, although he would probably wouldn't sign a 1-year deal. He would sign something much longer than that. And as Donna mentions in the chat, the Bronx, the Yankees have said that they're not interested, but shoot, they could throw some.
Believe me, this year they're not smart enough to go after Trevor Story. They're gonna move our third baseman to shortstop, and DJ LeMay is gonna be flying in the air. They're not smart enough to get Trevor Story. Trust me on that one. And Carlos Correa and Aaron Judge will kill each other. So that's not really going to be a good fit. I don't think the Bronx is going to capture Story. I just, I worry about the shortstop position now that the whole team revolves around Gleyber Torres playing second. I don't think they're going to get him, but I'd like to see him go to the Cards actually, because that would be such a cool infield.
A little
Can't help it.
tidbit about middle infielders, gang. As middle infielders age, you've got to find a spot for them
Yep.
to move off the position. And Story has something going for him that will keep his value, and that is he's a plus runner.
Yeah.
Plus runners in the middle infield can easily move to second base, third base, or the outfield, whereas guys who are average to below runners,
Yep.
once they slow down in their early to mid 30s, there's nowhere to play them because their lower half goes earlier than other players. So always look at middle infielders from a running standpoint. It does make a big difference to personnel people.
The shortstop market was very weird before the expiration of the CBA. There were two teams right off the bat that signed pretty extensive contracts that didn't really need shortstops. It wasn't a primary need. The Rangers with Seager, I mean, you could make the argument with Simeon too as a shortstop. I mean, they doled out just crazy money for those two. And then the Tigers with Baez. I mean, that just came out of nowhere. So there might be a third, and I just can't recall, but the shortstop market was very weird to start, and it'll be interesting to see which teams that we just talked about that need shortstops, who they go after.
Alex, I think I'm the lone Tiger fan on this. Baez surprised me a little bit, but signing the shortstop did not. I thought that was probably at the top of their list particularly after they signed a pitcher. And I thought, but I did think the speculation about Correa was just nonsense, even though because of his price. Yes, there was the connection with Hinch, but that's not going to override what was the difference? $65 million. The Tigers reported him $275 million. And he was looking for $340 million. So for 10 years. So, and I also think that I'm actually relieved because I think signing Correa for 10 years is not a good deal. And if he really holds out and gets that, I think somebody's going to regret it. Not the next couple of years, but somewhere down the road. I don't regret the Tigers signing Cabrera for a long-term contract, but they got their value. But I don't think you're going to get that kind of value from Correa for 7 or 8 years.
To finish up on the Rockies and their shortstop situation, I've kind of thrown it out there, and Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts, but right now they could be going with a platoon at shortstop. They got a left-handed glove first guy. Oh, I already see the eyes. I already see the grimace, but a glove first guy, a minor league signing, nice minor league signing, right? Nice minor league signing. And Kyle Holder, and then Alan Trejo, who had a good year. He's been kind of an undervalued guy all throughout the minors. Skipped low A once they drafted him, and so he bats from the right side. So you could see that at shortstop. You actually, I don't think you've seen it since the Tigers did it. I want to say like in 2013 with a couple guys, but not to pile on the Rockies entirely. But going back to the conversation about signing guys before they're a year away from free agency. Ryan McMahon and to a lesser extent, Ryan Maltapia and Kyle Freeland have only 2 years left. So right now in 2022, you can literally say after next year, these guys are going to be free agents. And so that gives you a little idea where this franchise could be headed. They were able to lock up Antonio Senzatella, which was a nice little thing, if you will, but they got McMahon and Freeland, two of their better guys, going to be free agents in 18 months, if you will.
There's been a lot written about Ryan McMahon potentially moving over and playing shortstop. And we'll see if anything comes of that.
Sure hope not, Kurt.
I have a particularly critical question about the Rocky shortstop situation. After this year, starting next year, are Trevor Story jerseys trash or collector's items? I saw a lot of Trevor Story jerseys at Coors Field when we were there this summer.
He's really well liked. If you go back and watch the last game that he played, there was like a 2-hour rain delay. It was cold, and fans still stuck around because the final Rockies home game of the year, all the players go out. He was choked up in the post-game press conference. He was holding back tears. He was crying in the dugout a couple of days before. So he's got a good connection with the fans. Fans love him. It's a different situation than Arenado a little bit, who may or may not have asked for a trade, and there's this, that, and the other. But Trevor Story, he's kept in really high regard. He's going to be welcome back.
So the answer is they're collector's items.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of the time, we had a number of inquiries, and our board chimed in and had some things on another subject. The Rockies made a personnel decision over the last week or so where they hired a new director of professional scouting, and that is Sterling Monfort. And that had a lot of reaction, a lot of conversation. Patrick Saunders wrote about it over the weekend. It's something that many of you asked to talk about tonight, so the topic's wide open.
Well, I'm wondering just how much scouting experience he had. I mean, being an administrator of scouting is kind of like a secretary job, and they've turned it into he's been like a scout for 8 years. What is the truth in that area?
He's got that tourism degree from college, though.
Yeah,
I've said it.
Roll out a tarp. He also knows how to roll out a tarp. Important.
I don't ever remember hiring a pro scouting director and asking them about their tarp rolling expertise. I think I erred in that. And I hired many pro scouting directors, and I missed on that. I apologize.
Well, where's Brian Cashman when you need him for the Rockies? Because we got to have somebody help the owners.
Nicolette.
And possibly not the heir apparent.
Nicolette, the problem with Brian Cashman, or even, a year ago when he was untethered,
Many problems with him,
and was a free agent, and Theo Epstein, the question is not, what does that interview look like for him and Dick Monfort interviewing Theo Epstein. It's Theo Epstein interviewing Dick Monfort and saying, look, here's how it go down. And so your wish will not get granted for anyone who's worth their weight in gold, if you will.
Yeah, I know. But, one can dream. What are you without dreams? Man of La Mancha was one of my favorite things. Dream the impossible dream. Just find somebody to scout. Yeah.
Here's my glass half full take, I guess, on the Monfort thing. I mean, they're going to own the team forever, right? Yep. I mean, Dick is going to give the team to his sons. And so might as well have Sterling learn how front office works. And, so there's going to be no benefit to this, let's face it, in the short term. But maybe there will be 10 or 15 years from now, right? Like there's not much great about it short term, but the one benefit is hey, the kids are going to learn the ropes of how to run a team. It's looking for the silver lining in the darkest of clouds, right, guys? But at least that's one positive.
The problem is they've only had the experience of watching the Rockies run the team.
Yeah, right. It's a morbid experience, right?
Well, Samuel Johnson says man lives from hope to hope, not dream to dream. So we'll hope.
So let me outline what a professional scouting director's role is like. Okay, just so you know. This person is usually your first or second best evaluator. The person is somebody who goes in to make the final call on trade discussions in most major league organizations. It's someone who listens to all the scouts, reads their reports, asks follow-up questions given their scouting experience. How does he compare to this guy? What do you think about this? Comes up with a scouting philosophy of what the organization's looking for, how we're going to scout. How, are we going to scout by level, by organization? How are we going to handle the future? It's generally one of the most experienced people in your organization. Almost always, an evaluator, and almost always somebody with the experience to ask the tough questions, having scouted. And that's why this decision for me was stunning. I just have to admit, stunning. I've never heard of someone with as little experience and never even having professional scouting experience, or for that matter, an area taking that role given their situation. I've never heard of it, and I'm not alone. So many of my career peers were mystified by the move, and just understand you're asking somebody to do a role that he is just not qualified for, and it'll be, the results will be evident. You can't thrive in that role without that experience, and it's going to be a shocking result, but they made that decision, and we know reading that they didn't talk to anybody else externally.
Another angle on this too that makes it a little tricky for the Rockies organization is now anyone that comes in there and might question Sterling, or rather really, do you want to get involved in a situation like that is very incestuous? I mean, I haven't directly spoken with John Weil or Zach Wilson for why they wanted to leave the organization, or all the analytics people. Obviously, it's not directly tied to Sterling, but this general sense of not just nepotism, but just kind of head in the sand a little bit on a lot of different topics. And so, again, it's going to be hard finding really good qualified people from outside the organization who want to come inside the organization.
Well, there's a real question about whether they want anybody from the outside, Patrick. To me, the bigger, more disturbing thing, both Dan and Patrick, was the lack of any external search for a general manager. So we get Greg Fiesel, who, a close friend that might or might not be on this call, says doesn't know anything about baseball. In fact, has gone on record as saying he doesn't even like baseball. Says, wow, we had the best guy here. Why look outside? I would just compare, look what the Broncos are doing for a head coach right now. Are they looking outside? Do they look internally? They want the best person possible. And to me, I think the Rockies fans are being done a huge disservice by Dick Montfort's internal focus. And of course, the Sterling thing is sort of the cherry on top of the incompetent Sunday. And I'll add Bill Schmidt's comments that he would hire Sterling for this position, even if Dick Montfort wasn't owner. It just doesn't pass any smell test. It's absurd.
Well, I also think that, what I felt, and maybe other people feel this way, or it's just an off-hat thing, is that what I've been dissatisfied with, besides some of the decisions, but I'm not an owner or a manager, is that I feel that the team is a footnote and not the star of the show. That everybody's more interested in all the hoopla that's going around, and that's what's being touted, and not our team. We're there to watch baseball, aren't we? I mean, I just feel as if our team is a footnote to what's going on in the stadium. It's not the star attraction, and that's not how it's being marketed. Coors Field is entertainment, but I don't know what kind of entertainment. I guess it's, watching the game from the bar or whatever, but the focus does not seem to be on the team. And that's just how I feel. Like, anybody go to watch the game anymore? Selling up beer and all the other stuff and gonna make money.
What do they say when you go to a hockey game? You went to a fight and a hockey match broke out, a hockey game broke out. It's kind of similar to Coors Field. They went to an outdoor beer garden and a baseball game broke out.
Good point. I just
That's it,
drives
right?
me crazy because I'm the person that doesn't want to get up from their seat during the game. And lean so far forward I could fall into the stands. But it just, I just think it does a disservice to, I don't know, the players. It's not very respectful. We're selling the entertainment experience, and I don't think baseball is the primary focus because they're going to make money. Pack those seats, sell that beer. It's a nice place to sit out and discuss life. Except if you're in the sun, of course, but beyond that, I just think that the focus is no longer on the team or on baseball.
Who's in the running across Major League Baseball for second worst ownership situation? The Orioles, maybe?
Yeah, maybe, but they, look, in a couple more years, you'll be talking about this club, believe me.
Artie
They had an
Moreno.
international draft. They got 24 real good ball players.
Interesting owners, maybe Artie Moreno for the Angels, and dark horse, he's new, Stephen A. Cohen is an interesting cat. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think Moreno was one of Monfort's best friends in the ownership circle, so that's an interesting comment there.
Yeah, they do some interesting things. I forget what they did with some recent coaching hire. They made an announcer. Oh, no, their GM was an announcer and then became the general manager, and a recent coach that they hired didn't have any on-field experience. I think he was a front office guy. So look, if you're doing things outside the box and you're successful even 50% of the time, you can get away with those kind of decisions. But when you struggle, as much as the Angels have been and the Rockies, you know, these kind of decisions are they're critical because you can't get the easy things correct. And so going outside the box, you can barely play in the box. So going outside the box is dangerous.
Can the Angels continue to not make the playoffs with arguably the two best players in the game?
Well,
I think the Angels have one of the great young general managers in the game in Perry Manassian. And I think you're going to see a massive turnaround from the Angels. He's extraordinary. He's one of the finest people in the game and is an absolute gem. I think you'll see a huge difference in the Angels next year and moving forward.
I'm excited by that, Dan, because as you know, this last year's draft, 20 picks, 20 pitchers. Okay, let's go. Let's see what happens. This is interesting.
Dan, you got somebody with their hands up for a long time.
That's Mr. John Paul. Go ahead, John.
With the best hat next to Ken Reed for me tonight.
Just trying to unmute.
And it's live. This is live. JP, we are watching you. Try to unmute yourself. This is a special experience right now.
How's that?
Here you go.
Here you go, sir.
Awesome.
Hey, Dan, your comment about mid infielders.
Yeah.
Further into their career, moving to another position.
Yes.
Reminds me of Robin Yount.
Yeah.
Great example.
And
Great example.
I might be wrong, but Mr. Monfort reminds me of Charlie Finley when he owned the Kansas City A's. And if you really read a book on Kansas City athletic baseball, you'll find out how Mr. Finley destroyed the club.
The same club that won 3 World Series in a row and 5 division titles in a row.
Yeah, but
That's right.
he blew it up in Kansas City and he had to leave because the fans got tired of his nonsense.
Yeah, he was crazy, but he put together some amazing talent.
And then tried to dismantle it.
That's when he got a decent GM in Kansas City. I forget the GM's name, but he was a lackey, and Finley ruled him. So anyway, that's all I got to say.
You know, Robin Yount might be a good example of a player moving from middle infield to the outfield. But I wonder if more typically it's in middle infielder really is only suited to play first base or DH when they slow down in most cases. Another example of somebody who didn't need to do that was Craig Biggio, who moved from second catcher to second base to center field. But I think Ernie Banks and Rod Carew are probably more typical. The catch is that very few middle infielders can hit like either one of them. And so, you know, playing your average middle infielder, even if they're a fairly decent hitter who slows down at first base, may not work very well. I think the ability to go to center field is probably pretty rare.
Well, Craig Biggio was a rare player, Mike. That's a great point. Craig Biggio is a rare player.
Well, Biggio is, and so was Yount.
True.
By the way, Yount is an answer to a great trivia question for a Tigers fan. And that is that he's the second player to win the MVP at two positions. Who was the first?
And Greenberg?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
First base in 35 and left field in 40.
He invented the
That's an unusual move.
And Hank Greenberg invented the first baseman's mitt too.
That's right. That's great trivia too. Well, I don't want to be the bad guy here, but it's 9:15 almost. And this has been a great night. I am really thankful for everyone who participated, both Rocky Mountain members and people who joined us from all over North America. As was pointed out earlier, we stretched from Boston to Hawaii today. That's pretty remarkable. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Jay Jaffe for joining us tonight. I thought he was terrific. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Remember, we will not have a meeting tomorrow at Blake Street Tavern. Remember Sabre Day on Saturday the 5th. We will definitely have a meeting. And remember all those deadlines. And if you forgot them, go on the sabre.org website and join us for the analytics conference. Think about the analytics course that debuts next week. It's a terrific opportunity. And all in all, just thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Alex.
See you guys.